All the false choices I think we get offered in would-be leaders today. You got to hate the other party to be a member in good standing of your own. We're going to crash the economy if we try to save the planet, or if you can't be about social justice and expanding the economy at the same, all this stuff. You got to hate the police to believe Black Lives Matter. One of the false choices that we are offered nowadays is that we have to hide from our history to love our country. And I just don't believe that's true.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schmidt. I'm 52 years old, and I can honestly say that I have never felt better. For the first 50 years of my life, I navigated some pretty fucking hard things that I like to call my Wholey Schmidt moments. They include things like being diagnosed with cancer, navigating my sexuality, adopting children, two divorces, losing my dad, and having a biological child in my 40s. After decades of some really, really hard work, I have fallen deeply in love with myself and my life. Turns out that embracing the magic and the expansion that comes with getting older, it isn't a bad place to start. I'm here to prove that life doesn't have to decline with age. In fact, it gets a whole lot better. On Wholey Schmidt, we are going to dive into my curiosities around wellness and longevity and mindset, and we are going to do it with really vulnerable, thoughtful conversations with people that I really love and admire. This season, we are going to celebrate and honor growth and transformation and find profound beauty in connection. Welcome to the show. Have you ever thought about your own personal legacy or the contribution that you're going to make to this world that is uniquely you? Have you ever thought about how that legacy might connect and indeed form a community of people engaged in critically important work? Well, today on Wholey Schmidt, I want you to meet a dear friend of mine who I met way back in 2008 when he was running for governor of Massachusetts. If you know your history, you know I'm talking about former Governor Deval Patrick. Deval is a man who has committed his life to service, to equity, to justice, and yes, to building community. Today, we talk about that life. We talk about what he's doing today. We talk about all the important things that unite us as humans in this world. I hope you really, really enjoy this episode because recording it was incredibly special for me. He is a unique, special human. Welcome to Wholey Schmidt. Governor Deval Patrick. This has been a recording that I've really, really, really been looking forward to.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
First question is, can I just call you Deval?
No, if you want to be informal, just call me Your Excellency. That's it. Of course, Sarah.
Great,
come on.
perfect. You can call me Dr. Schmidt.
Okay.
This will be fun.
I'm looking forward. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you.
And thanks for doing this, for the contribution you're making to examples of kindness and perspective that are so incredibly important at all times, but maybe especially right now.
Well, I really appreciate that. I feel like we need a double dose right now of kindness and authenticity and honesty and maybe a smidgen of vulnerability thrown in there. There's a softer version of us that I long to be more around.
Isn't it funny how so much of what passes for leadership today confuses or treats that soft part, that sense of touch and vulnerability as inconsistent with strength? I've been reading or rereading Doris Kearns Goodwin's latest book on leadership, and she uses examples of outstanding leadership from four presidents that she's written extensively about independently, and she talks about Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and FDR and LBJ. And one of the things that she lifts up is their empathy and how they learned to be empathetic, how they learned to be patient with the human condition. In fact, how curious they were about how broken we all are, and how their leadership was about the led in the end and not themselves as leaders. So for that reason also, I'm really glad for what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think her work is exemplary. As you were talking, I also started thinking about Brene Brown, and all her work around encouraging us to think about our vulnerability as a strength.
And
when I think of you and your work, this morning as I was getting ready for this conversation, I thought back to February of 2007 when I first met you.
Gracious.
Okay,
Wow.
so we were at a conference in Miami, and you spoke at that conference, and it was the first time I heard your story when you were running for governor. Because weren't you elected in 2007? Or had you just been elected?
I think I had been elected and just taken office.
And I was so inspired.
Oh.
I really was. And I want to try to capture a little bit of that this morning, because what I think I met then was really like this kind of the essence of you. I'd love to just kind of share a little bit of that with people who are listening today, because there's a theme through my podcast, and we talk a lot about, Wholey Schmidt moments. And I narrated a whole bunch of mine, the things in my life that have made me kind of stop and, holy shit, that was big. I got to learn something from it. This is going to change me.
Yeah.
What am I going to do about it now? How am I going to go forward from here? Yeah. When I heard you speak in 2007, you talked about some of your Wholey Schmidt moments.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you kind of go back to that and just share a little bit about who you are, like the things that really shaped you that make you who you are today.
Thank you for the big and broad question. And at the risk of not remembering exactly the stories I told in 2007, I'll just say that I'm recording this from downtown Chicago today, where I work, commuting back and forth from Massachusetts. I grew up here in Chicago on the South Side, and I lived there with my mother and my sister and my grandparents and various other relatives who, came and went in our grandparents' 2-bedroom tenement, and a lot of that time on welfare. There was so much about that community at the time that was broken. Families were broken, sidewalks were broken, playgrounds were broken, livelihoods were broken, but there was a very strong sense of community, because that was a time when every child was under the jurisdiction of every single adult on the block, right? You messed up down the street in front of Ms. Jones, she'd straighten you out as if you were hers, and then call home so you got it 2 times. And I think what those adults were trying to get across to us was that membership in a community is understanding you actually have a stake in your neighbor's dreams and struggles as well as your own. That we belong to each other. And I've told that story when I was campaigning, and I was beginning to get comfortable with talking about who I was, and not just what I wanted to do. And why I wanted to qualify for people's votes, if you will. And I remember I had this marvelous young man who was I think the first paid staffer and one of the first volunteers. And he came out with me at one point to Chicago, and I've been at it. I've been governor for a while. We went to the South Side, and we were recording something, and who should come walking across the street except Ms. Jones? And he said, "That's a real person?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I just thought that was a composite." I said, "Well, it sort of was, but here she is." And of course, she was then the age I thought she was when I was a kid, right? I mean, you know how that is. I had amazing teachers in our public schools, teachers who taught us how to look up rather than down, who helped us imagine what it might be like to be a citizen of the whole world. And not just of the South Side. And I don't say that as a way of demeaning the South Side or diminishing the South Side. But I remember my 6th grade teacher in particular, this is another Wholey Schmidt moment. my sixth grade teacher, Mrs. Quaintance, taught us to count and say the greetings in German. She took us to the first opera I'd ever seen. She took us to the lyric opera. I don't know what they were singing about. I still don't really know what they're singing about, but it was magic. She took us to a brand new movie that was out at the time called The Sound of Music. And she used it to introduce us to modern European history, the rise of the Nazis, and that story. And I think probably for any kid, but especially for us, the idea that you could be a citizen of the world, that you could, and that you were supposed to understand your place in it, and not as a limiting factor, but that it was all of yours to imagine and to grow into. And she stayed, as many of my teachers did, she stayed in my life for the rest of hers. Right? She was present when I graduated from college and from law school. She was present at our wedding, Dinah, my wedding 41 years ago. She was present when I was sworn into my post at the Justice Department. She would have been present at my inauguration as governor had she been alive. My third grade teacher came. There were adults like that, people I knew. And then there were people whose names I never knew. And I'm sorry, Sarah, to go on, but...
No, this is beautiful. I want you to keep going.
And I've written about this. There was... so I had this opportunity to go to boarding school at Milton Academy through a scholarship on a program called A Better Chance, which for me was like landing on a different planet. And I remember coming home on a vacation. I was maybe 15 or 16 years old, and I'm back in Chicago, and I was late to meet somebody. And I went hauling up to the bus stop to get on the bus, just as this sort of wheezing CTA bus was coming up, and I jumped on the bus, and I was standing there, and there were still coin boxes in the bus. You had to pay your fare when you got on. And I realized only at that point that I didn't have enough money for the fare. And I stood there, looking and feeling ridiculous. And the bus driver, who was this, old wizened black guy with sort of black and white salt and pepper beard, he looked at me and he says, "Sit down, son." And he pointed to the seat closest to the door, and I knew he was going to let me have it, just ream me out for trying to get one over on the CTA. And I tried to explain I'd been away and I was in a hurry and maybe the fare changed and so on. And I wasn't trying to cheat. And he turned from me, and the bus is moving. He turned from the road and he looked at me, Sarah, for just a second. He sized me up instantly, right? The way people who serve the public can do. And he turned back to the road, and his expression softened, and without looking at me, just said, "Pass it on, son." It was so impactful then and still. Just total random act of grace that the power of which I thought, I could live like that. That's a meaningful thing that he just gave me. I have no idea what his name was, where he is. I don't know whether that was his way of being or just that moment for him, why he decided to share that kindness with me and maybe not with somebody else. But it was so impactful. It just made me want to be grow up to be a better man. Isn't that a funny thing? Yeah. And I think there are moments like that we experience, right? Some from interactions with people we know, some from totally random interactions with total strangers, that set your day and can reset the way you think about your life.
There's so many things that in what you just shared that resonated, and I was just thinking to myself, so I grew up in rural Wisconsin, right? Mm-hmm. I had like one neighbor, middle of cornfields, very small town, mill town. Most of my friends, their parents were second and third shift workers in the paper mills. Mm-hmm. This last August, my sister and I, who now lives in Newton, Massachusetts, by the way.
Is that right?
With her 3 kids. Okay. We took our families and my mom to Austria. Wow. Because our favorite movie as children was, can you guess?
The Sound of Music.
And my mom was a was a nun. She went to the convent after 8th grade as a way to kind of just continue her education in living in total rural poverty. And so we have pictures of my mom as, Sister Suzanne with the wimple. And the movie was just something that we would watch over and over as kids for many reasons. The music, the story, the kids, but the nuns. So we took Grandma to Austria to go do our own little version of The Sound of Music with Grandma. And we traipsed all over Austria in matching shoes that were painted to look like the curtains in the room that she made the play clothes out of. And,
wow.
For me, growing up in that rural community, that movie was a window to the world for me too. And it created this level of curiosity about, like, how could that have possibly happened? Like, what? I mean, how, trying to understand this horrific war and the impact it had on people. And of course, it's The Sound of Music, so it's such a, sensationalized story. But though moments like that, I could tell you all about my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Donnemeyer. I remember when she died of cancer, and what a loss that was to our community, our tiny little school. I think your stories are reinforcing for me my own understanding of community and what it means to grow up in a place and connected to a place and people who know you, who show like authentic care for you. I mean, that's what that bus driver did.
Well, yes. And I think it's something, it turns out we are all hungry for.
Craving.
We are all craving. And I think of the communities I have become a part of, geographic communities in industry, the way we try to approach politics and political leadership, and what is lacking, I think, from politics is so often practiced today. I will say, Diane and I went to I think it's called the Salzburg Institute, and it was during the Salzburg Festival.
Yeah.
And the Schloss is right on the lake, was the set for the Von Trapp family. And we stayed in the Schloss.
We did. We have
were
a
there.
picture of all of us across the lake with the Schloss on the back, the lake where they tip the canoes,
Right.
Yeah. We have a whole picture of all of us in our shoes. I'll send you the picture.
I love that.
What else struck me is I have a son. I have a couple kids that I adopted, and my 19-year-old son is in school in Milton, Massachusetts. He's at Curry College.
Come on.
There, but for the grace of God, this young man who was born with sickle cell disease and has kidney disease and ADHD and a whole bunch of learning challenges and flat feet to boot and all kinds of other things. Deval, he is getting his education in Milton, Massachusetts.
He's making his way. Well, it's an amazing school. I'm an honorary degree recipient.
Are you?
I am. And the new president was a cabinet member of mine.
Wow.
And a very, very good friend.
Wow.
So I'd love to connect.
Oh my God, this is great.
I was out at the campus not long ago with him, and he knew the names of every student, every staffer, every security person who was there. But I bet he knows your son's
I'm sure he does. He kind of
son's name.
stands out. One of the reasons why we'll be successful at Curry is because of the program they have, this PAL program that supports kids with learning challenges and learning differences, and helps kids who struggle with executive functioning and all the things that he struggles with. And for me, the college search was just this beautiful experience because come on, I went to Northwestern, I got 2 master's degrees and a PhD, and could have kept going and going and going. But when we did the search for him, it was, is there a place in the world for a kid like him? And to find out that, yes, there's not just one, but several, was kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
I'll never
Built
forget.
to purpose, too.
Exactly. The day he got his acceptance letter, the look on his face, I can see it actually just thinking about it. He had this mom, they picked me, kind of sense of like, they want me. And for a kid who hasn't always felt successful in lots of different contexts, to know that there was a place in the world for him was extraordinary, and I think it resonates with some of the things you and I have talked about, most recently about legacy. And that's what I want to focus on today, because I think as we've gotten reconnected and I got familiar with some of this work that you're doing now in this part of your life, what I see and perceive is this desire to really define your legacy. I feel like that's something we all ponder, especially as we get older. But I don't know that we talk about it all that much and why it's important, why it matters, Why do we desire it to be so? Curious what your thoughts are on just the word itself and if it resonates for you at all.
It's interesting. I think, first of all, it makes me sound old. I feel like I have a chapter or two more. You do. But I will say, I hope my legacy is defined by the impact on others rather than something more about me. Do you know what I mean? When I was in office, every once in a while, folks would say, well, we're doing this or that infrastructure project. Is this the chance to have it, to have that bridge or building named after you? And I would say that's sort of not my thing. I don't mind if it, one day it turns out somebody says they want to memorialize, but I'd rather memorialize me with a thing, but a positive thing. But I hope more that my memorial is in people who, as I said, of the impact that teachers on the South Side had of me, who learned how to look up rather than down, who learned how not to be afraid or embarrassed to be about kindness, to be about what you pass on to other people. And I think it's interesting that you think about, you made reference to Shared America, the project that, one of the projects I'm working on now as a legacy project. It really is about this idea of national community. Can we refresh a notion of common cause and common purpose when so much of our political leadership, not all of our leadership, but our political leadership emphasizes division and sensationalizes the other in order to gain political advantage, which I think it's an incredibly destructive, but also short-term kind of strategy, right? Because it's, what do you leave after that? What have you modeled after that? And if it's true that we are all hungry for a sense of connectedness, not sameness, but that we belong to each other. We're trying to do things that advance one another, which I think is the spirit on the whole and not without interruption that has built this country. When you look around locally, you see an awful lot of people working very, very hard at precisely that. But what gets elevated in the general narrative and the media narrative and so on is division and sensationalism and outrage. And so I think as I mentioned to you when we were talking about the Shared America project, if I said something kind about you, then the 4 people who follow me on Facebook would hear about it. If I said something outrageous about you and hurtful and nasty, true or false, right, the algorithm takes it from there.
It'll go viral.
Right. And we are left to believe that is the nature of the society we live in, the environment we live in, and we are afraid of each other. And yet, we are still craving connection and understanding. Most of us don't want to have to be made to feel like we have to surrender our convictions before we can even have a conversation with somebody who differs from us, or that they are going to require that of us. And all of it is a formula for entertainment almost, and not for building for the long term. So I hadn't thought of Shared America as legacy, but it does feel like the thing I can do in this chapter in my life to try to elevate those examples. And if I'm not, in my investing, my impact investing life, I'm trying to be that example in the way we do our business and the business that we choose to do. I can't be an example of that I'm not an example of that in politics anymore because I'm not in politics anymore, and I'm not even sure how to get into politics anymore. but I'm trying to do it where I can, and I it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it as legacy, but I hope I hope that's what I leave.
You made a distinction, which I think is worth just kind of reflecting on. And when I think of legacy, I think of impact. But you also mentioned sort of memorial, like, and I had cancer when I was 20. So I've been thinking about legacy for way too long, because for a couple decades, I really lived as if I was going to die. I mean, it was very hard for me to imagine a long life. And so I was always thinking about the end and what I was going to kind of leave behind, what would be left when I was gone, right? So I've had a lot of decades of practice at thinking about legacy. I now actually think I'm going to live a really freaking long time. So I'm playing much more a long game on the legacy front. But I also grew up in a family that was very much focused on, as much as we have success, we owe it to others to share and have an impact and do good and help others. And there was there were two parts to the equation. And one was how if we work hard, we can do good things. And if we do good things, we can do more good things, and the more good things we do, the more good things we can do. And they were one and the same. Feel a little bit like a fish out of water when I talk about that and talk that way with a lot of people, as if I am a bit of an anomaly. And sometimes I kind of worry about that. Like I worry about that even with my children, in terms of how I can pass on that sense of you belong to something bigger than you, and it is your job to take care of it and to tend to others. And stewardship. Live your life in such a way that it engenders more good things in the world. And this is as important as anything else. I was even just having a conversation, and I was saying something similar to this, and I find that people are often fascinated by my perspective on it, yet I don't feel like they're joining me in it. Do you know what I mean? The difference between someone kind of steps back and thinks you're fascinating versus leans in and wants to be part of it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a when I talk about impact investing, this idea that you can actually generate a superior return, financial return, while also doing meaningful good for all of the stakeholders, not just the owners, but the employees, the community, the planet. It's in this country anyway, it's kind of quaint. It's, well, show me. And I see it, but I think the point is, I have a couple points. First is, when you start to think about long-term rather than short-term, it's very hard not to arrive at impact investing. It's very hard not to arrive at impact investing. And if you don't care about long-term value and you only care about short-term gain, I'll say that I think we've been taught that. We haven't always practiced capitalism that way in this country or anywhere else, but we've been taught that short-term gain is the way to be an effective capitalist, and are having been taught that for the last, I would say, 45 years or so. And that having taken hold is one of the reasons why young people's confidence in capitalism is slipping away, because they see the damage that short-termism has brought. And on the flip side, they don't see enough examples of a long-term play. They're out there, but they don't see enough examples of those kinds of behaviors not to think that at some level it's either quaint or that you're a chump for trying to do that and not extract as much as possible from as many people as possible. I'll tell you, every time I'm in one of these meetings where people are talking about offshoring jobs, particularly, service-oriented jobs like customer service jobs, to some other place where people are paid, pennies on the dollar. And then in the same breath, or breaths a couple steps removed, talked about how customer service and satisfaction is the key to to growing market share. And it's like, how many times have you been on the phone with someone in a completely different time zone who cannot and is not empowered, who cannot help and isn't empowered to help you actually solve your problem? I'm not saying I don't want to be understood to say, you can't get good customer service from someone who has an accent, whatever that is. That's not what I mean. It's just that there is such a limited way of thinking about what a company is supposed to do, what a business is supposed to be about in order to sustain itself over time. I think we have been taught bad habits, and we're going to have to teach, by example, better habits. And I think some of the biggest and most prominent capitalists need to understand that capitalism is at risk in the absence of better and more consistent habits of long-term value.
I think you're spot on there. And I mean, what stood out for me is that we're going to have to lead by example. Mm-hmm. Talking about this is one thing, but it's really the doing, right? The demonstrating. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder if you would talk a little bit about, we could talk a little more about Shared America. I want to highlight this because I think it's a really special project that you have going on. And, it's also a chance for me to catch up with how it's going. But how would you define, what it is? First of all, what is it, and how did it come about?
So Shared America, I think I would describe as a campaign over time to shift to a more positive national narrative based in truth and in examples. And I'll say it came, I hope I'm saying it right. As you know, Sarah, we are iterating, but I had a hunch and have for some time that we are less divided in this country than we are portrayed. Mm-hmm. And some of this relates to what I was saying earlier. There is so much in our legacy and digital media that favors outrage and division as a business model, and to the point we are led to believe that we are, at each other's throats. Yeah. There are business interests. There are foreign interests in encouraging that narrative. It serves a lot of dark interests, in my view. But I had a hunch that we were less divided, in fact. And when I was at the Kennedy School, we started a research project to try to understand from an awful lot of deep listening. So not just polls, but long engaged focus groups and with a lot of different people in a lot of different places, asking open-ended questions and just trying to get people to talk. And as the relationships were built and deepened, a couple things emerged. One was that actually, I'd say Americans are pretty darn curious about one another. They like to know and work with people who are not the same. They just don't want to have to feel like they have to renounce their views and background as a predicate to building those relationships. They don't want to have to say, I hate Trump before I can be my friend, for example. Yeah. Or I hate, other black people before I can be a friend of you, whatever the association is. They are, it turns out there is pretty broad consensus around three, I'll call them American aspirations. Mm-hmm. One, not surprising, is freedom. Mm-hmm. A second, encouraging and a little bit surprising to me, was opportunity. Mm. And the third, very surprising and wildly encouraging, is equality. Mm. Equality from all sorts of people, right? not just people who look like me or you, not just folks from the Northeast or from, liberal environments, but actually equality. And of course, that shouldn't surprise me, because what is portrayed in modern politics as the so-called grievances, I hate that term, but I think you know what I mean, the grievances of rural people, of white working people around economic uncertainty, social isolation, despair as measured by things like suicide rates and addiction rates, are exactly the same hurts that Black and brown people are anguished over in urban communities. It's exactly the same. And increasingly, I think the political dynamic in the country is not Democrat, Republican, it's insider, outsider. And then most of us feel outside. And so I think all of that, for some may be a reason or a series of reasons to despair. To me, it's an incredible opportunity for optimism. Because in that space, when you think about and you go find the examples of people actually working to build community and common cause at the local level, there's lots of material to amplify. What they don't have is an algorithm that does that.
Yeah, right.
And so what we are trying to develop is a way, using the very same tools that have been used to divide us, to amplify those examples of positive. Again, to the point that examples, we talked about this in the business context, that examples teach. And I think we're going to find more and more, really from the ground up, not from some marketing genius who tells us what the messaging ought to be or what have you. And by the way, this is totally nonpartisan. I don't care about the parties. I'm trying to think about how we as a country rebuild a foundation on which a functioning democracy can exist. And those shared aspirations are a beginning of that. Now we need to identify more of, as we've already begun, local examples of people actually practicing that kind of community building around those kinds of values, and use those same tools that the dark forces have used to divide us to amplify those good stories. So it's going to take us a long, long time. We're going to learn as we go. It's going to cost a ridiculous amount of money that I don't have, but that we're asking people to help us raise. And I hope, I think all of our hope is that Shared America as a brand, people never hear about. That what they hear about are these stories and these examples, and what they look to are these people, their neighbors and friends, or people like their neighbors and friends who are trying to do as much good as they can for as many people as they can in all the time they have to do it.
That little soundbite that you said you weren't good at, that was a good one right there. That was a good one. Yeah. I'm just struck by all the stories and thoughts just are running through my head as you're talking about just how powerful it is to hear, you run into somebody and they tell you a story about something positive that happened or something good they did or the way they helped somebody out, or you get a thank you, or, you go out of your way to be a little extra kind, and how that just engenders so much good energy that we so desperately need.
Right.
Yeah. We also have kind of a big anniversary coming up, don't we, for our country?
We do indeed. We do indeed. Yeah. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd have gotten this work going long enough in advance to influence that 250th anniversary coming up in, I guess it's 2 years now. Yeah. And maybe we will. Maybe we will. It's funny. They're all the false choices I think we get offered in would-be leaders today. You gotta hate the other party to be a member in good standing of your own, or you have to, we're going to crash the economy if we try to save the planet, or if we you can't be about social justice and expanding the economy at the same, all this stuff. You got to hate the police to believe Black Lives Matter. One of the false choices that we are offered nowadays is that we have to hide from our history to love our country. And I just don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's true. I think that there were very clear-eyed Black volunteers fighting in the Second World War, including my father-in-law out of Vicksburg, Mississippi, who understood they were fighting for a principle that they were denied at home, but who believed that we meant to try to live up to those aspirations in the end. And that their being a part of that effort was they're not waiting for it to happen to us, but that they were contributing to it. And, as I say, we have not been consistent in our history. I think our history has shown us that there are examples, powerful and instructive ones, of people who committed themselves in a way against reason, but because of hope, to moving the country closer to its best and highest ideals. And I'm hoping, and I will admit to feeling a little doubtful because it's coming up so soon, but I'm hoping that as we tell our story and we remind ourselves of our story in time for the 250th anniversary, that it is all of our story and not the story of just a few of us and not a myth, and that reflects the real struggle that people have made since our founding to try to get it right in a multiracial, multi-ethnic, polyglot experiment in self-government. And I think in some ways, if you ask most immigrants, they'd say in every way, the most extraordinary experiment in self-government in human history.
I feel really inspired, Deval, listening to you talk about this, and I feel really hopeful. If we can get a little more inspiration and hope out in the world, I feel like there's such a desire for it. I mean, humans, we long to be...
That's what you're doing.
Yeah, we long to be inspired, right? Well, that's what we're trying to do, but I'm sort of saying we collectively, that hope, that optimism, I know it's there. It just needs to be, it needs a fire lit underneath it.
It needs permission too.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. I had a conversation with somebody last week, met for coffee. He was like, "Oh my God, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. Oh, I can't even believe what happened." He's talking about the election, of course. I can't stop thinking about this. Like, aren't you just so worried? Aren't you so worried? Oh my God. And it went on and on and on. And I said, no. He looked at me like I had three heads. I said, no, I'm actually not worried. Now, here's the thing. I'm not one to worry about things I can't control. I've learned that there's no use in that, right? So I've stopped doing a lot of that, right? And I often feel like worry and angst keeps us from actually action. So I'm going to spin my wheels in the worry and the fret and the what ifs. And what it does is it keeps me from having to actually move forward and do something, because I think most people don't know what to do, right? So we stay in the worry to avoid the doing because we don't know what to do, right? But I also said to him, I said, I have this very strong belief fundamentally in the founding of this country and what it stands for and our democracy. And I believe that it's bigger than any one person or any one party or any one period of time. And we're still a young nation. And, I feel like this is who we are now. And there are times when I look back and I'm not super proud of who we were. If I was living in, I don't know, if I was living, in the night, any other time period, I could identify times that were just, I wouldn't be proud of a lot of things. I feel like it's time for us to really take a good hard look at the value that all this angst has. Make a collective decision that we're going to put it aside.
Yeah.
Let's put it aside. Let's figure out, I always say to my kids, just be where your feet are today. And what can you do today? A lot of what you're talking about is in our daily actions as human beings, the decisions that we make, the things that we actually can control. How do we make choices that engender more hope, more life, more goodness, more kindness, more inspiration, all those things? How do we do that in our daily life? The way we interact with each other, the way we spend our money, the way we, all the things.
Yep, all the things. And I think it's when people are asked to make it as personal as that, in some cases it seems insignificant or unorganized. You're not a part of a movement of this or that, or maybe just too difficult. Like we'd rather focus on somebody else's choices than our own. We'd rather focus on policy change rather than personal change, if you know what I mean. And I think they're all important. To your point, rather than wait for the big gesture, the big election, the new leader, the big new pod, the big protest, and so forth. There's a place for all that, and we should participate in it as and when we can. But we're not absolved. We're not off the hook. And I mean, people ask me, how do you stay optimistic? And it's like I'm not unrealistic. I'm very clear-eyed about the threat to the planet, the threat to freedom, sort of license for meanness that seems to be at large right now, and how dispiriting that makes us, and is supposed to make us dispirited. That makes us, and how I'm not, and the impact is different on a whole lot of people who are not you and me. I totally get that. But I also understand that in the face of other challenges, my ancestors remained hopeful. They did what they could do. They taught hopefulness, and all of that enabled me to be sitting here talking to you.
I know.
All of it. And
it's so ironic. Last night I was having dinner with some friends here in Aspen, I mean, okay, lucky me, but I was talking about my grandmother, and who raised 8 children in the midst of the Great Depression. And every meal there was a homeless person at the table who was passing through off the train.
Yeah.
There was a priest or a nun from the church across the street. She managed to figure out how to make a little more food. And while that person was sitting at the table, she would have them change into clothes that were my grandfather's so she could darn theirs and send them on their way. This is a woman who collected, bacon lard, bacon grease. And we brought her all of our wax paper cereal box liners. And we never threw away a piece of tinfoil because we brought it to Grandma because she would figure out a way to reuse it. I mean, in the 80s, this is still how she was living her life, Those were hard times for this country.
Right.
And people suffered. And yet we can highlight just the, pages and pages and stories and stories and stories of all the good things that were done that got us through it.
Yeah.
I feel like we got to come back to that.
We do. And again, I think it's happening. It's just that those stories don't get told. It is happening, and it's its own form of resistance. I'm a person of faith, the way your grandmother and your mother, and maybe you, Sarah. I think you don't have to be a person of faith, or you don't have to blur the line between church and state, because there is this notion of civic faith in this country. When you think about our founding principles and the extraordinary thing that we were organized differently than other countries. We were not organized around geography or language or even a common culture. We were organized around these civic ideals, and they were imperfectly applied from the start, but they were uniformly motivating across differences from the start. And they have always created this tension in this country between our reality and our ideals. And we are a greater country and a more powerful country when we are demonstrably trying to close the gap between our reality and our ideals. And one of the things I love about the leadership I read about during the Depression, political and otherwise, is that our leaders, not all of them, but many of them, and FDR chief among them, we're lifting up stories of sharing, of common cause, of optimism. We're trying different things to get through this together. As I like to describe it, that we are better when we turn to each other rather than on each other. I think history's shown us we can do this. We have done it. And I think, as I said, I think it's happening in ways that we don't get a glimpse of today. So back to shared America. That's part of what we're trying to be about.
I want to wrap this up in a way that brings it very much home. for you and me. And I know you're a father and you're a grandfather.
Yeah.
How, as a parent and as a grandparent, Deval, how do you encourage, engender, inspire these things in your children and their children?
Well, I will say as a dad, it's been amazing to see our kids parent. To some extent, they are definitely doing things that are meant to be conspicuous responses to the failures of our own parenting. It's so clear. We laugh about it. But I also see that they live values-based lives, and they talk to their children about their values and the choices around values that they have made, and they live that way. And their kids are a little militant sometimes about those values. Our grandkids are hilarious that way, but they're very self-aware. I'm not self-involved, but very aware of the impact they have on others, and that they want to have on others. I don't know that any of the old ladies in church on the South Side actually talked about community. Yeah. They behaved in ways that showed us they understood we had a stake in each other. There were things they did. There wasn't enough food, but there was always enough food if you were hungry. The clothes got passed around, stuff just like you described during the Depression in your family. And so I think our children behave that way without saying, I learned this from my mom and dad, and I see our kids and the way they are with other children, and the way they are with our grandkids, that is, and the way they are with adults. By the way, not always beautifully behaved, but they seem to know better. And I don't think that's all about, finger wagging, and I don't even think it's mostly about that. I think it's just seeing how their parents are in the world, how they talk to and about other people, how they value their friends, how they laugh, how they, it's a running joke in our family about me as a crybaby, because I love kids' movies and I love movies, but even the Hallmark commercials can get me if it's just the right commercial. It's just a running thing everybody laughs about. But as I see our kids become emotional at things and they laugh and they say, "Oh my God, I'm turning into dad." It's and our grandkids watch to see who's going to cry first at this or this. And you know what? To me, it's okay because they see me feeling. They see. I think they see me as a rational person with a wicked bad temper. I get all that, but they also see me feeling things and feeling, I hope, empathy. And so if I think they're getting it. I hope they are, and I'm encouraged by what I see.
That's really beautiful.
They're beautiful. They're beautiful people.
Well, I got to meet a few of them, I think, when we were together in Washington, D.C. for a conference one year.
Indeed.
Extraordinary.
Indeed.
Deval, this has been a joy, really, to connect with you.
Mine, and thank you.
I feel I'm going to walk away from this conversation feeling a lot of hope and a sense of my own ability and responsibility to participate in that.
Then that's a contribution, and I'm proud of that. And I'm so proud to know you, Sarah. Thank you.
God, thank you. You're doing really great things, and I'm excited to see where this all goes. And I'm on board. So
appreciate you.
Yeah. So here's to collaboration.
Amen.